Her body was shutting down. 17 days without real food. A shattered leg. Endless jungle. Every breath drained what little strength she had left. Somewhere above the thick green canopy, helicopters searched for a body they no longer believed was alive. Down below, Amanda Eller had only one question left. Would today be the day she was rescued, or the day the jungle finally won? In the wilderness, survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about making the right decision after making the worst mistake of your life. And the four people you're about to meet survived disasters that should have ended their stories long before anyone found them. Their rescuers gave up hope. Doctors couldn't explain how they were still alive. Yet somehow they all came back. Amanda Eller had lived on the Hawaiian island of Maui for years. She was an experienced hiker, a yoga instructor, and someone who knew the local trails well enough to walk them without a second thought. On the morning of May 8, 2019, she left for what she expected to be a short hike through the Makawao Forest Reserve. She carried no phone, no map, no food, no water, and no emergency gear. She planned to be home before sunset. That decision almost killed her. At some point during the hike, Amanda stepped off the main trail to rest. When she tried to return, every direction looked the same. Thick trees blocked the sunlight, and dense vegetation erased every familiar landmark. She walked for hours, convinced she would eventually find the trail again. She never did. As daylight disappeared, panic slowly replaced confidence. The sounds of birds faded, the temperature dropped, and every step took her deeper into a forest she no longer recognized. By the first night, Amanda realized something terrifying. She wasn't temporarily lost. She was completely alone. The next morning brought no rescue, no voices, no helicopters, no footprints. Only silence. The hunger started slowly, but the thirst came first. She searched desperately for water and eventually found streams flowing through the forest. She had no way of knowing whether the water was safe, but dying from dehydration wasn't an option, so she drank anyway. Days passed. She survived on wild fruit whenever she could find it. Sometimes she recognized what she was eating. Sometimes she didn't. Hunger eventually becomes stronger than fear. Then everything became even worse. While climbing down beside a waterfall, Amanda lost her footing and crashed onto the rocks below. The impact shattered her leg. Pain shot through her entire body. Standing became impossible, and walking was no longer an option. From that moment forward, every single meter had to be crawled. Sharp volcanic rocks tore into her skin. Rain soaked her clothes every night. She slept beneath fallen trees and inside small caves, hoping they would protect her from the cold. Infection, dehydration, and starvation each introduced a new way to die with every passing day. Meanwhile, outside the forest, Amanda's disappearance had become national news. Friends, volunteers, rescue specialists, helicopters, and search dogs combed through thousands of acres of jungle. But the forest refused to give her back. After more than 2 weeks, experienced rescuers quietly admitted what nobody wanted to hear. The chances of finding Amanda alive were becoming almost zero. And then, on the 17th day, a helicopter flew over a remote ravine that had already been searched before. One crew member noticed something moving below. At first, it looked like leaves blowing in the wind. Then they looked again. It wasn't a leaf. It was a hand. Amanda barely had enough strength left to wave. When rescuers reached her, she was severely dehydrated, badly injured, and dangerously close to death. Doctors later said she was incredibly lucky. A few more hours, and the ending of her story might have been completely different. But if surviving 17 days in a tropical jungle sounds impossible, the next man survived somewhere far less forgiving, a place where every single night could freeze him to death before sunrise. The man standing in the middle of the Australian outback had one terrifying realization. There were no roads, no people, and no phone signal. Just endless wilderness stretching farther than the eye could see. Ricky McGee had been traveling across one of the most isolated regions on Earth when his life suddenly took a disastrous turn. Hours later, he found himself completely alone in the Australian bush, hundreds of kilometers from help. At first, he believed someone would find him within a day. Then another day passed, and another, with no rescue, no passing vehicles, and nothing to signal that help was on the way. The Australian outback is one of the harshest environments on the planet. Daytime temperatures can become dangerously hot, while nights are cold enough to drain the last bit of energy from an exhausted body. Water is scarce, food is even harder to find, and every decision can mean the difference between life and death. Ricky quickly realized he couldn't waste energy wandering aimlessly. Instead, he focused on one goal: survive today and let tomorrow wait. He built a crude shelter from branches to escape the brutal sun. When rain finally came, he collected every drop he could. Hunger soon became unbearable, and he survived on insects, frogs, and whatever edible plants he could safely find. Every meal was tiny, but it kept him alive for one more day. Days slowly turned into weeks. His body became thinner, his muscles weakened, and even standing required enormous effort. Meanwhile, search teams covered massive areas of the outback from both the ground and the air. Friends and family refused to stop searching, but as the days passed, hope began to disappear. Many people quietly accepted the same heartbreaking conclusion: nobody survives this long out here. But Ricky refused to become another statistic. Every sunrise meant one more chance, and every sunset meant he had won another battle against the wilderness. By the second month, he had lost a shocking amount of weight. His clothes hung loosely from his body. Walking became painfully slow, yet he kept moving whenever he had the strength. Then, after 71 unimaginable days, a group of cattle station workers noticed movement near one of their tracks. At first, they thought it was a wild animal. As they got closer, they realized they were looking at a man who looked more like a skeleton than a survivor. It was Ricky, barely able to speak, barely able to stand, but somehow still alive. Doctors were stunned by how long he had survived under such extreme conditions. Against every expectation, he walked out of one of the deadliest landscapes on Earth. Most people would call that impossible, but the next survivor never had the chance to prepare. She wasn't lost, she wasn't hiking, and she wasn't even on the ground. She was 30,000 feet in the air when her airplane literally broke apart, and what happened next remains one of the most unbelievable survival stories ever recorded. On December 24th, 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Coep boarded a flight in Peru with her mother. It was supposed to be a normal Christmas journey, a short trip, a routine flight. Nobody on that plane knew they were minutes away from one of the most terrifying disasters in aviation history. The aircraft was flying over the Peruvian rainforest when a powerful thunderstorm suddenly surrounded it. Lightning struck the plane, and within seconds, everything changed. The aircraft began breaking apart in the sky. Passengers were thrown into chaos. And then, Julianne was no longer inside a plane. She was falling thousands of feet above the Amazon rainforest. Somehow, unbelievably, she survived the fall. When she opened her eyes, she was lying alone in the middle of one of the most dangerous environments on Earth. The rainforest was endless, with no roads, no buildings, and no voices. Only trees stretching in every direction. She was injured, covered in wounds, and completely separated from everyone she knew. The crash had killed everyone else around her. But Julianne was still alive, and she understood something immediately. Staying in one place meant waiting for death. So she made a decision that would keep her alive. She started walking. Julianne remembered something her father, a biologist, had taught her: streams and rivers eventually lead towards civilization. So instead of fighting through the impossible jungle randomly, she followed the water. For 10 days, she moved through the Amazon alone, with no rescue team, no map, and no proper food, only determination. The jungle tested her every single day. Heavy rain soaked her clothes, insects surrounded her, and her injuries became worse. But she kept moving. Every morning she woke up with the same mission: find people, find help, stay alive. On the 10th day, she discovered a small boat near a riverbank. It was the first sign of human life she had seen since the crash. Nearby, she found a shelter used by local workers, and eventually, she was discovered and rescued. When the world learned her story, many people couldn't believe it. A teenage girl had survived a plane breakup, a massive fall, and 10 days alone in the Amazon rainforest. But her story wasn't just about luck. It was about knowledge. It was about staying calm when panic would have been easier. And it proved one important lesson. Sometimes survival doesn't belong to the strongest person. It belongs to the person who can think clearly when everything around them is falling apart. But the next story is different, because this time there was no jungle, no mountains, no aircraft, just one man, a tiny life raft, and an ocean so vast that the horizon looked endless. For most people, being stranded at sea for a few days would be a nightmare. But this man was about to spend more than 2 months fighting the ocean itself, and almost nobody believed he would ever be found alive. Stephen Callahan thought he was prepared for anything. He was an experienced sailor. He understood the ocean. He knew the risks. But on one night in 1982, the Atlantic Ocean showed him something no amount of experience could fully prepare him for. Stephen was sailing alone across the ocean when disaster struck. In the darkness, his boat suffered severe damage, and within minutes, the vessel that had carried him across thousands of miles was no longer safe. The ocean began taking everything away: his supplies, his equipment, his shelter, his only connection to the world. Stephen had just one option. He escaped into a small inflatable life raft, and then he watched his boat disappear beneath the waves. Suddenly, he was alone, not in a forest, not on a mountain, but in the middle of an endless ocean. There was no land in sight, no people, no rescue, only waves stretching in every direction. His life raft was tiny compared to the massive ocean around him. Every sunrise brought the same question: would anyone find him before it was too late? Stephen knew that panic would kill him faster than hunger, so he focused on survival. He repaired his damaged raft again and again. He collected rainwater whenever storms passed overhead. He used simple tools to catch fish from the ocean. Every small action had one purpose: stay alive for one more day. The days became weeks. The weeks became months. The ocean became his entire world. During the journey, storms attacked his tiny raft. The sun burned him during the day. The cold drained his energy at night. There were moments when rescue seemed impossible, but Stephen continued fighting. After 76 days alone at sea, a fishing boat finally spotted him. The crew could barely believe what they were seeing. A man who had disappeared into the Atlantic Ocean more than 2 months earlier was still alive. He was weak, and he had lost a huge amount of weight, but he had survived. Stephen Callahan's story became one of the most remarkable examples of human endurance ever recorded, because surviving in the wilderness is not only about having the right equipment. Sometimes, it's about refusing to believe that the situation is already over. For people, for impossible situations, a woman trapped in a jungle with a broken leg, a man fighting the brutal Australian wilderness, a teenager walking through the Amazon after surviving a plane disaster, and a sailor alone against the endless ocean. Their stories were completely different, but they all faced the same enemy: the moment when the human mind says, "There's no way out." And they all answered with the same decision: not yet. Because survival is not always about strength. It's about making one more move, taking one more step, and fighting one more day when everything tells you to stop. The wilderness does not care who you are, it does not care about your plans, and it does not care about your confidence. But throughout history, some people have proven something extraordinary. The human will to survive can push beyond limits that seem impossible. And these stories are proof that sometimes, the difference between life and death is simply refusing to give up. If you enjoyed these unbelievable survival stories, subscribe for more true stories of people who faced impossible situations and somehow lived to tell the world about them.